And the closer that you look at these Rails Terriers, the more there is to fall in love with. Hi there to you, I hope I find you well, and today's video here with me, Jenny Kirk, up in the loft on Ware Yard, we're going to be doing something a little bit special. Now, Rails of Sheffield have very kindly lent the channel 6 of their new released Terriers, and this includes a sound fitted example as well. Now, these haven't gone on general sale at the time of filming, but they have very kindly sent over a sound fitted one as well, so we can put that through its paces. And a little bit later on in this video, we're also going to do a side-by-side comparison of 2 of the models that I have a like-for-like model from the Hornby range, just to see how the 2 compare. Now, this video today comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories, designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Now, we're not going to be doing a DCC fitting guide in this particular video because all of these models have come ready DCC fitted. However, if you need to find a DCC fitting guide for the Rails of Sheffield Terrier, we did review one of their first batch Terriers a little bit while ago on the channel, and that included the full DCC fitting guide for the Next 18 decoder from Trainomatic, and we're going to put a link to that down below for those of you that are looking for that. But I'm really excited to show you these models, and so with a big thanks to Rails of Sheffield, come with me and I'm going to put them through their paces. These are the 6 Terriers that Rails of Sheffield have very kindly sent over on loan. They're all DCC fitted from the factory, except Boxhill is sound fitted, so really looking forward to seeing that. So you can see here for reference all of the different catalogue numbers. So we've got the Southern Railway A1X, we've got the Isle of Wight Southern Railway, and these do differ, and I'll talk a bit about that in the review. We've got Brighton, the gold medal winning terrier, which quite famous, does still exist today. Boxhill 2 does still exist in the National Collection, and both of these are in the A1 form. Back to A1X, we've got the Western, Cleveland and Portishead Railway number 4, and of course the Terriers were really successful, but even when the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway started to dispense with them, a lot of them were sold on for further use, and the Western, Cleveland and Portishead Railway was another line that bought 2 of these Terriers, and actually bizarrely they ended up in the Great Western Railway's hands, so really quite far from home. Going back to the A1 Terrier, we've got the Southeastern and Chatham Railway Green. Now the Southeastern and Chatham Railway, again another line that bought a single Terrier, number 751, but it got that really ornate, fully lined out livery, which you're probably more familiar with seeing on things like the C class or the H class, and indeed Hattons have also produced the P class in that livery as well. So there's actually quite a lot of stablemates that can go with this particular one. Now I'm going to put all these boxes to one side, and I'm only going to show you the contents of the box for one of them. So we've got here Boxhill in its box, and it's the standard Rails packaging, and these are actually almost a clone of the Dapol packaging. In fact, produced in partnership with Dapol, you can see that the documentation inside is all Dapol specific. In this, that you don't get in the just standard DCC fitted or basic DC models, we've also got an extra piece of paperwork concerning the sound fitted option. So just a few little tips and hints on the CV settings. What I've actually found on this is that actually you don't need to really fiddle with anything out of the box. It's also got a little note here about the real drive experience, and this is just a way that you can enhance the actual operational experience, should you so choose, when running this on DCC. Let's get this out of the packaging. It is very well protected, actually. I do like the packaging. It does give you a sense that the model has been well protected in transit. There's some detail here, a couple of bits of user-addable pipework. The only problem with these is I think you do need to remove the slimline tension locks, otherwise these do foul, but they are in there if you wish to user-fit those. You also get the blanking plate as well, should you ever decide to convert the model back to DC, so it's a next 18 blanking plate. Actually, quite large, surprisingly enough. So just going to put that to one side. We don't need any of that really for this. And let's get the model out of the packaging. So here is the model of Boxhill, which of course is one of the terriers that does still survive to this day. In the National Railway Museum in York, you can actually see it in this livery, although I have to point out at this point that the version that the National Railway Museum are selling is slightly different to this. There are two versions of Boxhill. This, direct from rails of Sheffield, is the model as it was when new, and the National Railway Museum has a few minor differences. I believe it's a gloss finish, and that's representing the model as it is preserved today. But the improved engine green is this yellowy brown. It can be quite a difficult colour to get a precise match for, but so the story goes, is referred to as improved engine green. Stroudley was colourblind, and I don't know whether it's a rumour or whether somebody was having a bit of a joke, or maybe Stroudley himself had a bit of a sense of humour, but there's nothing really green about it at all. However, on the model itself here, the application is really, really nice, and it does match the pictures that I remember from looking at the Reverend W. Awdry's representation in his books, in the artwork. Actually, he didn't do the artwork, but there were some really, really quite vivid pictures, and I do remember in one of the books Stepney appearing in this livery, and this is really kind of the colour that I would expect to see it as. Now, over the years, we've had it certainly on the old Hornby model. I've seen it just as almost like a chocolate brown and all sorts. So it is nice to see that the colour application does seem to be pretty much on the money. We've got all of the usual refinements that I picked up on in the review that I did a few months ago of the BR Black version, but I was particularly keen to see the improved engine green version, because this livery in this very, very light colour is actually quite cruel to models. If there is anything not quite right, this is the livery that really does show it up. So I'm looking over this, and I'm not seeing any extra holes or anything like that, any panel gaps, so to speak, that shouldn't be there. But some of the areas that the Rails Terrier does actually have, which I've found are missing to some degree from the Hornby one. If you look down underneath the boiler, that was a big area for me. I picked up on this at Alexandra Palace a couple of years ago now, that we've got a representation of the inside motion. Now, it doesn't go around, it doesn't work, it's not quite that sophisticated, but the fact that it's there does look very, very nice. And in all honesty, once you see that, you can't actually escape the fact that on the Hornby model, and that is not actually there. And with this light colour of this livery, it does really show it up. We've got the turned metal chimney cap, and that is actually very, very fine there, the way it flares out, and because it's metal, it will hold that shape without risk of damage. So that, again, another quite a characteristic thing on these locomotives. It does look really, really nice. Now, this is an A1. Some members of the class did get rebuilt to an A1X form, and they tended to lose the smoke box wings, as you see there, these sanding boxes, and a number of other detail differences as well. Now, Rails and Dapol have tooled up for a number of different bunker options as per the prototypes. When we reviewed the BR Black one, we had the extended sort of greedy bars on the top of the bunker, and this is correctly represented here without. and actually we get the full depth of the bunker, so you get the full back of the cab. It's riveted all the way down. Now you can see, and this is where the light livery can be a bit cruel, and I will talk about this because you know, I don't want people to say, well, you missed the bleeding obvious. This was an area that people really seem to have an axe to grind with the design there, the way that the back of the cab fits into the roof, and you get this kind of line effect. Now the line has been done to line up with where there would be a change in shape, a change of profile of the roof, but you can't really escape the fact that in the white it does show that up. And for me, that's one of the areas that I think it's probably the cruelest area that people homed in on. And all I can say is, if that is your deal breaker, then there's a lot that you're missing in other areas that really should be a deal breaker for you, of this and the Hornby one, which, you know, if you're focusing on that, in fact, I'm going to bring in the actual like-for-like comparison, and this is Brighton here. This is the Rails of Sheffield version, and you can see that the livery application between Boxhill and Brighton, the colours match, really nicely done. But I've also got the Hornby version here of Brighton, so we get a like-for-like comparison. Now I can see that there's a minor colour difference, but I'm prepared to forgive that. In all honesty with you, I think there would have been some minor variance over the lifespan of these locomotives where they were painted. So I'm not really going to hold that against either model, that they're ever so slightly different shades. One thing that you can see is that the lettering on the sides, it seems the drop shadowing is a little bit more pronounced on the Hornby model as it is over the Rails one, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more realistic on the Rails one. And we can see that gold medal Paris exhibition lettering a little bit clearer. It doesn't seem to have come out quite so clear on the Hornby one. And let's face facts here. People have been focusing on that cab back as if that's the only difference between these two models. And quite frankly, let's take a look. The motion underneath the boiler, we talked about that on Boxhill. You can see there on the Rails one, we've got all of that representation under there. It's really nicely done. Underneath the Hornby one, it's just red. Bare red, there's nothing else there. You've probably also picked up on, there's that parting seam in the boiler. And that's where, when you take it apart, if you looked at the video that I did reviewing Brighton, I did the DCC fit, and the bottom of the boiler stays with the chassis, whilst the top there is part of the body. We don't have that seam on the Rails one. You can see there the boiler is complete, there is just no seam whatsoever. And we get a bit of a panel gap on the Hornby one. It is a shame. Again, these are fairly minor, but I guess that is fairly minor as well. Now, the big area for me that once you see it, you cannot unsee this. Trust me on this. Look at the front of the cab. We've got Rails on the left and we've got Hornby on the right. And this is, I refer to this as the bullet holes. It looks like somebody's been taking pot shots with a BB gun. Now the reason for those holes is that's where, if we get the A1X version, and I'm actually, just to show you this, I am going to bring this in, and this is the one that I reviewed, the Brighton Works, the Hornby model. Those holes were where the extra detail pipes go in. So you can see there on the A1X version, we've got all the pipes that actually go into those holes. Everything is tickety-boo, because that is the A1X version. The A1 version, well, those pipes aren't there, but the holes still are, because it's one cab front for both types of models. So we get, particularly showing up on this improved engine green model, it really does highlight the difference. And like I said, it's a cruel livery for showing up indiscretions such as that. So that's another big area I've spotted. The glazing, if you look inside the cab on the Hornby one, compare it to the Rails one. Rails is proper flush glazed. The Hornby one, we get a glazing bar across front and back. And as you can see, it makes that back head detail just a little bit less visible. So we've got much more going on in there in the cab. In the rails one, there is, well, there's some detail in there, but that glazing bar does obscure the dials at the top, and again at the back we've got the glazing bar across. Now, it's not a deal breaker. Again, I don't think any of these are something that is so glaring as to rule one of these out over the other. But these are things that I've picked up, and it does annoy me a bit when people keep focusing on that cab back when there is so much else that the Hornby model has compromised on that the rails one has not. Another area, look at the buffer shanks at the front. We have lining on the rails version. We do not have that lining on the Hornby version. If you look at the chassis, no lining on the Hornby one. We've got that lovely red frame, and it does show off the detail quite nicely, but if we put that to one side, bring back in the rails one, you can see the lining is there behind the wheels. And doesn't that make such a difference, just bringing out some of that extra detail that is in there? And this is what I mean, the more you look, the more you find. That's not to detract from the Hornby one, and I don't want people to take this video as being that I'm suddenly all against the Hornby one. I think the market is big enough for both. But I want to correct some of the things that people have been saying quite cruelly about why they don't like the Rails Terrier, and actually look further. There is so much more. That Westinghouse air pump is nicely done on both, but it just has the edge on the Rails version. The cab handrails just picked out ever so slightly better. The printing on that number, we can read that London, Brighton and South Coast Railway there, and it's just ever so slightly less defined. You can see this kind of a orange peel effect on the 40 that is not there on the Rails one. We do have slightly different finishing of the cab interior, and again, I think there would have been some differences over the lifespan of these locomotives. So, you know, I'm not going to call one as better than the other, but certainly you can see that when we look down the top of the boiler, there are some differences. The top of the tanks are painted slightly onto the boiler, capturing those rivets on the Hornby version. On the Rails version, we see more of the top of that boiler. We get the lining at the back of the boiler that is missing on the Hornby version. The lining on the front bands there, it's much clearer on the Rails version. And of course we get that turned metal chimney cap. And also the pipework as well. What we can see is that the colour used, this looks more like a kind of copper pipe. On this, it's more like brass. It's brass paint, but it doesn't quite look right when you see it alongside this. And of course, this is quite a cruel comparison. If you took this model on its own, it doesn't look bad, but you can see that extra attention to detail on the colour choices there. On the front faces, we're fairly even on there, but the kind of dished effect on the smoke box door, I don't know, I don't really want to call it actually. I'm not going to call it on there, but if we look to the lining, we can see an extra slight finesse to the lining. So I'm going to put the Hornby one to one side now, and I'm going to focus back onto the Rails versions. So we've looked over quite extensively the improved engine green versions, both Boxhill and Brighton from the Rails of Sheffield stable. Really nicely done. We've gone over some of those detailed differences, but these are the locomotives as they appeared at the beginning of their lives. Now, later on, they acquired an extra 6 in front of their number as they aged, went into the burnt umber livery. Now, that was one of the releases in the first tranche of models from Rails of Sheffield. Actually proved incredibly popular, sold out very, very quickly, so I do hope that they consider doing a second run of those. But we're going to move on now. I'm going to put these models to one side, and I will be running them later, including the full sound work through of Boxhill, so stay tuned for that. But as I said before, the London Brighton and South Coast Railway did find other uses for these locomotives, and of course some of the ones that were sold on did find their way to other railway companies, and these are some of the other liveries that have been offered by Rails of Sheffield. So I'm going to bring out the next two here now. We've got the Southeastern and Chatham Railway liveried version, and also got here the Western, Clevedon and Portishead Railway number 4. Now I'm going to talk about the Southeastern and Chatham Railway one first, and you can see it really is a lovely application of the livery. Now it's also got some very, very subtle lining out. There's a kind of a black surround to some of the cutouts in the chassis underneath there. We've got the wheels picked out in that lovely deep green colour, but the lining as well, this can be quite easy to kind of smudge in the printing process, but it's come out so sharp. So we've actually got two different greens, a yellow and the red there all going on, and that really does work ever so well. Again, the drop shadowing is done to absolute perfection on that SE and CR. And the number on the back, we've got there number 751, Southeastern and Chatham Railway. We've got the same really clear cab detail that we had on the improved engine green versions, and you can see those dials. They are ever so sharp because you can see them properly. We've also got in there the back head of the boiler, nicely picked out. Now those little numbers at the bottom, I mean this is a very cruel close-up, but that's the firebox flicker effect. Again, another USP, unique selling point that the Rails Terrier has over the Hornby competition. Again, we'll come to that in a bit. We've got a much better representation of the flush glazing at the back of the cab. We've even got a representation of the way through, where the coal would be got through. And again, that Westinghouse air pump is really nicely done with all of these different coloured, copper coloured pipes all in there and finished. And it hasn't compromised the lining. The lining's all been done in the proper sequence so that it's all correct there behind the Westinghouse pump. You can see on the top there, again, I will highlight this, it's much less visible on these darker liveries. The top of the boiler is somewhat utilitarian. In fact, I'm going to just go back and check and try and see what detail differences we have. So here we have one of the first accurate detail differences on the models, and you can see extra pipework there across the boiler that is not there on the original improved engine green, and the condensing apparatus as well has been removed, and there's no holes left where errant detail that's not on these versions should be but isn't. So really nicely done. Just looking there as well, yeah, we've got pretty much all the detail where it should be, and I do particularly like the way that the boiler colour picks out the line of rivets and really shows them out on both different versions. Now this is another model. I'm just going to put that one to one side, and I'm going to bring in again, this is the Hornby version. So we've reviewed this on the channel as well, and I'd just like to highlight some of the differences. Now again, I do want to stress, I don't want to be seen as being taking things away from the Hornby version. It is still a great model, and just to prove that, this is the model that the Hornby one replaced, and as you can see, no comparison whatsoever. So we did get a really good retooling, but the Rails model does justify the pedigree branding that I have seen talked about with it. Again, you can see the extra lining on those buffer shanks. The colour of that red looks better as well. That looks a little bit bare plasticky. I don't think it is, but the actual chassis colours don't quite look right. And when we look underneath, I think they're done with just moulded in body colour rather than painted and finished. On the Rails one, that chassis is correctly picked out so we don't get all of where the couplings attach done in the same colour, which does look a little bit odd, but of course you're never normally going to see too much of that. We've got the correct pattern brake blocks as well. And one thing I would say about the Hornby version is that the brake rigging does look a little bit finer on the bottom there. Just bring up the rails one. But again, it's a minor discrepancy. The drop shadowing on the SE and CR, it does look better on the rails one, I have to say. That 751 and the works plate, fairly close, has to be said. But we're looking there at the bunker as well. This is an area where the Hornby model comes always filled with coal. I believe that's just stuck on over a lead weight. But in being able to see right down into the bunker, you can see there the lining kind of just ends at the rivets. Whereas, in fact, I'm just looking there, the rivets are not there on. Let me just bring back in this. So we get the rivets down the middle, which are not on the SECR version. So again, detailed differences between the two. And I don't see a horizontal line of rivets on any of these different versions. I'm just looking down there. I'm trying to, let me go back to, again, we've got horizontal rivets instead of vertical. I don't, that is a little bit strange. What I'm going to have to do is go away and find a photograph of the back of something like Boxhill and just compare there. Now, my feeling is that the rails one is correct. It's quite interesting, but we've got the full lining on the rails one, and it just kind of ends at those rivets on the Hornby one. Just doesn't quite work, and it almost feels overpronounced. That light green looks a little bit too thick on the Hornby version. The rest of the model does compare pretty favourably, but again, I think there's so many little areas. We can see that seam at the bottom of the boiler. It's not there on the rails version. That motion between the boiler frames, not there on the Hornby version. And I can see that there are a lot of detail differences that really go into making this a much more refined model. Looking again at the back there, again clearer on that buffer beam. The lining just looks a bit broken over the rivets. The number 751 there, just a bit sharper on the rails model. Now I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm going to bring out and look at the Western Cleveland and Portishead Railway model. This was another line that bought into the surplus Terriers. They bought two, and they actually lasted long enough to pass through into Great Western Railway stock, and the GWR livery with the shirt button logo is available from Rails of Sheffield. However, it's been selling so well that they didn't have a spare one that they were able to lend me at the time that I picked them up. So all I've got is this particular livery. Now, this is an A1X Terrier, not the A1. It has been rebuilt before it was sold on. And interestingly enough, at the grouping, when the Southern Railway was formed, a lot of the Terriers that had been sold on out of service came back into the same railway company's ownership. So the Southeastern and Chatham Railway locomotive became a Southern Railway loco, along with the Brighton and the Boxhill. But the Western Cleveland and Portishead Railway ones, they became Great Western Railway, and then when nationalisation occurred, they didn't find their way back to join the others. They didn't get their 326XX numbers, which I always found a bit odd. They remained under the Great Western Railway numbering system, and whilst one of them was scrapped in 1948, the other did actually last right through into the early 50s and saw some continued use. I believe there was actually even calls to preserve it, but fairly half-hearted calls, and in the end it was scrapped. Now if we look there, the A1 X version, we've got that completely different front. I'm going to compare it with the similar coloured livery of the A1 there. So you can see those smoke box wings, very characteristic, and those sandboxes at the side. Not all of the Terriers became A1Xs later in life. Some remained, like Boxhill. But you can see there the differences, but we still have that representation of the motion. Smokebox saddle is different. It's interesting, it's still got the condensing gear. So let's compare that to Boxhill. And that's very, very similar, but we've got extra pipe work there. So you can see, finished in that lovely copper effect. Other pipe work as well in different locations. There's a lot more going on there. It's a much busier locomotive top, but I love it. The chimney cap is still turned metal, but it's painted black. And that livery application, again, equally as sharp. And it is really nice. And what you can see is it's metal rather than plastic. And it does look and feel so much better for that. The chassis detail, it's all finished in black, but it is picked out really nicely. And another area that I'd like to highlight is that difference in the brake blocks. We've got the wooden brake blocks here on this, and we've got the later style brake blocks there on this. Now what's interesting is Brighton there has got the old style wooden brake blocks, but Boxhill has got the later ones, so that's actually a detail there I didn't quite pick up on when we were looking closely at those. Another one of the detail things here as well that I forgot to mention, the spokes there on the counterweights, they look like they're painted on because they are, and it was a thing that the London, Brighton and South Coast did, that actually they painted the representation of the spokes for the aesthetics, so really nicely done. Other detail differences that we have going on here, you can see we've got those greedy boards on the bunker, and they come with these extra protective bars across the windows. Looking down there, you can see the rivet detail goes down all the way to the bottom. Another advantage of the rails model is we do get the full depth of the bunker, so you can model this from empty to completely full however you so desire. You don't get that luxury with the Hornby version. And I do like that we've got the lining correctly going down to a certain point. Really is nicely done. The number on the back there, number 4, so sharp and crisp. I do love this model. Now the Western, Cleveland and Portishead Railway livery is one which has not yet been offered along with the Great Western Railway one from the Hornby stable. So for those of you that model this particular area and period, then you really do only have the option of the Rails Terrier, and actually there is nothing to be disappointed by because this is a superlative livery. And I'd actually mark this down as being the potential sleeper hit of the actual range, because for me, I would never have given this a second glance seeing it on the website, but seeing it in the flesh, I really do love this livery. We've got all of that same detail in the cab, but that extra detail with this A1X version on the top of the boiler really does look good. And this shade of green is absolutely amazing. We've also got those very prominent, very distinctive lamp irons on the front there. And really is a beautiful package. Now the cab as well, dark colour, hides that little join at the back. And then we've got some extra lamp irons there, ready fitted on the back too. And we're going to move on now to the next period of these locomotives' lives. And this is when they made it to Southern Railway ownership. Now, of course, a number of these Terriers did make it out onto the Isle of Wight, and they were actually initially sold to the railway companies over there, like the Isle of Wight Central. Now, here we are, here's the gauntlet going down. Nobody has yet, as far as I'm aware, ever produced a model of the Terrier in the Isle of Wight Central livery, so I would love to see that. I've seen pictures of it, both black and white, colourised postcards, and also I believe one of the preserved terriers has worn that livery during preservation. I'd love to see that in model form. But after the grouping, Isle of Wight railways all became southern, but the island locomotives had their own numbering system, which did persist. So we've got their W9, and this is Fishbourne, and it really is a lovely representative of the class. Now this is an A1X, but it's not just a re-livery of that A1X livery that we saw with the Western Cleveland and Portishead livery. Look at the bunker. We've got the correctly modelled enlarged Isle of Wight bunker. We've got the protective bars over the glazing, but we don't have greedy bars. But look at that. How nice is that? You can see a proper full-sized bunker. And the actual metalwork of the bunker is pretty much scale thickness. It really is nicely done. And the closer that you look at these Rails Terriers, the more there is to fall in love with. I really do like that look, actually. It does suit the look with that extended bunker. And I'm going to put it side by side with this southern one so you can see the difference there. Really, really nicely done. Now, that is something I do have to say that the Hornby model has also captured as well. I don't have any of the Hornby Isle of Wight Terriers, but certainly this is another beautiful livery. We've got all of that detail correctly applied on the top of the boiler. I'm just comparing it there, so it's pretty standard on the A1X. But one thing you will notice is these on the front of the tank are blanked off on this particular version. Some of the locomotives lost them in later life. They were part of the condensing apparatus, so it stood to reason that they would disappear when that was removed. We've still got that motion represented under the boiler, really nicely done. And looking there, we've also got a detail difference here. This is quite interesting. We have different riveting detail on that smoke box. I hadn't actually noticed that before. That is another detail difference between the two. Turned metal chimney caps as well. But that is, the more you look at these, the more you find of difference. And again, you can see there the Southern Railway, the mainland 2644, has got those lamp irons applied, whereas the island one doesn't. But again, we've got all the rivets on the smokebox face. It's actually quite sublime, the number of different detail differences that we're seeing on here. And we've also got the correctly blanked off fronts where the condensing pipes would have gone. Really is absolutely lovely. So again, another favourite. I think it's one of those things, the more I look at these, the more I fall in love with more and more of these liveries. And the Terrier is a locomotive that does keep on giving in terms of the number of different liveries that it has worn. But looking to the mainland, representative of 2644, really is a lovely representation of this livery, and the metal construction of the locomotive really does bring that paint finish off to a T. So all in all, really, really nicely done. We've got the later style brake blocks as well on there. But as you can see, all of these models have the correct mix of the detail differences to match with the prototype being modelled. Particularly like there as well, we've got that kind of hump in the middle on the lining. Let's just see, do we get that on the... No, we get a kind of a straight line on the back of the Isle of Wight one, and that curved line on the mainland one. So it's not just the same parts being added in. There is such an attention to detail on these. It really is nice. So there we have it. What we're going to do now is I'm going to put these locomotives through their paces, running them. I would also at this point like to bring in, it's not part of the current range. From the previous release, we did do a full review on this, but just for completeness, Here we have the Rails Terrier, but in the BR Black livery. So again, this A1X, but it's got the Isle of Wight style, a riveted smoke box, but the mainland version of the bunker, really nicely done. So we're going to put these locomotives now through their paces, and in particular, I'm really looking forward to showing you the other unique selling points on these. The firebox flicker, and of course that full sound Boxhill Terrier. So we have here Boxhill, and I've run through all of the different sounds, so we've got a video of that, so we've got it brought up on the controller here. So first up, F1 to enact the sound, and she starts to simmer away, and this opens up all of the other sounds. So 2 different whistles, F2, F3. There's also a distant version of both of those on some of the higher function keys as well. So for example, if the locomotive is on the other side of your layout, you can make it whistle a little bit fainter in the distance, which is quite nice. But we've got a number of other functions, ones that I really like. F4 will enact the firebox flicker, and that is coupled with the coaling with the fireman, which is a really nice touch. It makes it all make sense, because they wouldn't really have just rolled around with the firebox flickering all the time. That's only when the firebox door is open. So we hit F4 again to turn that off, and it completes the sequence, and you hear the slam of the firebox door as well. Really, really nicely done. One of the other areas that I really do like with this is the sync of the chuff with the speed, so it does match up with what's going on. And it's got that characteristic bark. Right, I'm going to turn the power off, and you can hear it coasting, and then you'll get that squeal of the brakes. I really like this. It's so thoughtfully put together. So you get all the different sound functions that are going on that kind of blend together without you having to think, well, do I need squeal? Do I need this, that, and the other? It does it all for you. And then, of course, there are a few other sounds as well you can add into the mix. So a very, very loud injector. That is incredibly loud. So I've just turned that off. And then on F11, we've got that air pump as well, the steam-powered air pump. Really characteristic sound, and it's just all the little bits and pieces like that which go together to make this a really great sound package. I've said an awful lot that I've been, still am, a pretty big fan of TTS sound chips, offering really great value for money, but now I've heard this Terrier, it really is blowing me away. This is how sound should sound, and it is such a nice recording, rounded, and I love the different functions that tie in with what the locomotive is actually doing. This is head, shoulders, knees and toes ahead of any cheaper sound chip. You are really getting a top-of-the-range, top-notch recording and rendition. The speaker that is in these locomotives is actually pretty good, considering it's about the size of an iPhone speaker. When we did the review of the BR Black version, I showed that speaker. Now, if you buy the DC version, the speaker is in there and fitted. But if you get the DCC fitted, not sound, but DCC fitted version, then the speaker has been taken out. It comes in the packaging, but if you wish to fit your own sound decoder in there, you will have to do a little bit of soldering to fit the speaker back in. The reason for this is because it was a quality control thing that Dapol spotted, where on the DCC fitted examples there was a risk of the speaker becoming damaged and causing issues with the mechanism binding it up. So they elected that in these instances it was a better way to just put the speaker in the packaging with the locomotive. Now, of course, if you want to go down the sound option, it is highly recommended to get the factory fitted sound option, because it all just hooks up with the locomotive so well that I don't think any aftermarket sound decoder is going to really come close to what they are offering ready to run. It's really one of the main unique selling points on this locomotive is the sound and firebox flicker. But on the closer inspection, it is quite clear that there is so much more. This is a very much more refined model. It feels like Rails have taken so much extra time in that it's taken to get this to market to make it perfect. Now, I know that of late they've kind of tried to shy away from calling it the pedigree terrier, because people really tried to rip into them, and I don't think that criticism has really been justified, given the number of areas that I've identified that these models really do stand head and shoulders above the competition. I think there is room in the market for both manufacturers' model, but one of them stands more towards the budget end, and it does feel like that locomotive is a little bit more budget compared to this. This is the model that you get if you want a definitive terrier, and I have to say that having had the opportunity to compare the SECR livery and Brighton as well, that I have in Hornby with the Rails one, it's not enough that I would personally replace my Hornby models, but it leaves me thinking that if I was purchasing them again for the first time, then there would be no contest. I would be looking to the Rails of Sheffield model. The standard DCC fitted versions do seem to be a bit sharper on acceleration out of the box, but you can change this in CV settings. The decoder being used is the standard Dapol Imperium Next 18 decoder, and they do seem to run very well and reliably. I also found that these locomotives do have a lot of weight and traction to them, so the amount of haulage capacity was pleasingly pretty good. I had them running with some pretty long trains, and they did seem to handle this quite well and with ease. When it comes to scores, I've already scored this locomotive when I did the review on the BR Black version, but I've been very impressed with some of these other liveries, and I guess that's what this video is more about, showing you the detail differences and the liveries that are available. Plus, in particular, it's been a great honour to be able to take Boxhill with sound for a test run. It's coming up to the time where I now have to put all of these back in the box to take them back to Rails. And I have to say that I'm going to miss them a great deal. I think these are a superb locomotive. They are the Rolls-Royce of the Terriers. That's not to take anything away from the competition. The competition is a reasonable locomotive, but these locomotives show little to no compromise. For me, the only detractions were that seam on the back of the cab roof, and I felt that it was, in the grand scheme of things, a somewhat minor deficiency when you compared it to all the other areas where these Terriers really were head, shoulders, knees and toes above the competition. It would be splitting hairs to say, well, I'm not buying that just because of that, and completely ignore the shortcomings on the competition in other areas. The best comparison is to take Brighton from the Hornby range and Brighton from the Rails Dapol range and compare them side by side. Those extra holes in the cab front, for me, really do stick out. This livery shows up all of the foibles. That parting seam underneath the boiler, where the top of the model lifts off the chassis, again, you can see it there, it's fairly obvious. Underneath the boiler on the Hornby one, there's just nothing there, just plain red. Whereas the Rails one, you get that motion, and it actually is quite obvious from a variety of different viewing angles. Another unique selling point for me, the lining on the buffer shanks, and the lining on the chassis too. It's safe to say that the models speak for themselves. I don't need to tell you what the difference is. It's pretty obvious to me. The sound on this, though, was really where it shined through. For me, Boxhill with its sound was just a perfect rendition of a Terrier in model form. Everything about it was perfect. The way that the sound synced to the motion, the way that you could drive the locomotive and the sounds matched up to that so well. From when you put the hammer down and let it race away, you could hear it working hard. And then when it either reached speed or began to coast as you started to take the power off, you could hear that change in the exhaust note, and it really actually was a joy to listen to. I've always said that sound can become very repetitive, but this locomotive breaks that rule. The more I used this, the more I wanted to continue playing with the sound options. It's actually a joy to have running around on my layout, and I feel that there's probably a very good chance that this locomotive here might not be going back to rails, because I've been looking at the pennies in my piggy bank, and I think I really want to keep this wonderful, wonderful example. As for the other locomotives, for me, the sleeper hit, I think, was the Western Cleveland and Portishead Railway locomotive. It really is a lovely livery application on that model. But not to take anything away from any of the others. Brighton is another wonderful improved engine green rendition. The Southeastern and Chatham Railway lined out livery is so nice. But they all are, and the detail differences between them really brings each of these locomotives alive. Well, a big thank you to Rails of Sheffield for loaning us these 6 Terriers, and I hope you enjoyed that video as much as I enjoyed making it for you. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and if you want to pick up one of the Terriers that you've seen in today's video, don't forget that we've got an affiliate link in the description box down below. It does not cost you a penny more to buy through that link, but it does help out the channel a great deal. You can also head on over to Patreon and help support the channel there if you so choose. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take absolutely great care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian Smith, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Trish Bits, Sparky 107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products, Sam Yates, and Dale Williams. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.